Hello everyone and welcome to STOked, the ultimate Star Trek online podcast. My name is Chris.
My name is Jeremy.
Jeremy,
Yeah.
what's our top story for episode 41?
Everybody knows
I know.
what the top story is this time around. Executive producer Craig Zinkovich has left the project. But you guys get a special treat this time around because in response to this, we actually have an interview with the new executive producer, Mr. Daniel Stahl.
Yeah.
He will fill us in on some of the goings-on that led to or are going to happen in response to Zink leaving the project. He's also going to talk to us a little bit about Season 2.0 and beyond.
Especially for the Klingon players.
Oh, yeah.
Stay tuned. All right, let's talk a little more news. Something maybe a little more positive. You have something else to sort of lift me up, or are you going to drop another bomb on me here?
Well, let's see. Season 2 on Tribble was delayed. Bomb!
But by the time this episode comes out, it should be out.
It should be out, yeah, actually this morning.
Yeah.
As of the time that you guys are seeing this. The entire patch. That includes the level cap raising, the ship interiors, the Klingon PvE, everything.
Yeah.
That's epic.
Exciting. So get over on Tribble and test it. And you never know, if you show up on Tribble and you're helping out, there might be some perks down the road.
There have been rumors that they will be holding another testing incentive event.
I think the plan is to have Season 2 up on Tribble till like the 27th of July. Like there's some weeks on there they need to test and they really want it ironed out.
I believe that the original launch date, live launch date for Season 2 is going to be July 22nd.
Okay.
But Stahl and I think one other guy has already come out and said that it will be delayed at least a week from that point.
So jump
Actually,
on
there's
there.
some guys in our fleet taking bets on the actual release.
Really?
Date. Yeah.
You know, we should remind people too, you can copy your existing character over your character you already have on Tribble. So if you've been playing on production for a while and don't want to lose your progress, you can take what you've done now and copy it over there.
In fact, I'll try to include that link in our show notes so you don't have to go digging around for it.
Right in the show notes. You can find those over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Find episode 41 of STOked.
And they're down there.
All right. Or if you're watching on the site, they're just down. You just scroll down. Yeah, as you learned last episode.
So as another...
That was nice, by the way. That was nice last episode. A little Picard dancing. Yeah, all right. Okay.
It was all me.
That was that.
Another thing showing up on Tribble in the near future are some major changes to the bridge officer power, reverse shield polarity. We don't usually cover news like this on STOked because individual changes to powers...
They happen all the time.
They happen all the time. But reverse shield polarity, I think, is a special case because right now it is such a great ability. I don't know anybody that doesn't use it.
Unless you don't have it.
I don't because I've been trying to consciously avoid using it.
Really?
Just because I had a feeling it was going to get nerfed all to hell in the near future. Now, the thread that we have linked in our show notes is them trying to come up with a response that's not going to nerf it to hell.
Really?
But will bring it in line more.
And how are people reacting to that?
Well... How would anybody react to losing their favorite power?
Yeah.
Or having it reduced in efficiency?
Yeah.
The idea they're doing, though, I like this. I like this new tactic they're taking is basically they don't want to just reduce it in efficiency, but make it more reliant on using another ability in tandem with it.
Okay, so as long as your other ability's up to snuff, or the other power, or whatever it needs.
You'll probably remain about on the same even playing field as you are now.
They seem to be trending to tying more and more to aux power and stuff like that too, and so you could always tie that kind of thing to
This will probably more likely tie to your shield power level, but still, yeah.
Well, maybe, right? Maybe it's a combination, because if you're doing something special, it might pull from aux, and then that's always fun because that's always when you pop that aux battery. I mean, we make fun of all those batteries that you pick up, but it really does, you know.
Especially this guy. At one point, I checked his inventory, and it was honestly,
it's embarrassing, Jeremy.
Every single slot in his bag was a battery stack.
Now, here's why, though. Well, not every single slot.
No, you had like 4 at the bottom.
Yeah.
But we're not.
It's fun because I like doing like what's the black hole spatial anomaly called?
Gravity well.
I love doing tractor beam, gravity well, aux battery first, tractor beam, gravity well, and then hit them with high yield torpedoes. That's one of my favorite maneuvers, and so I'll just sit there and pop those off.
I like doing that and then hitting them with a eject warp plasma because they can't get out of it.
Yeah, nice.
So it's a good little combo there.
I think that gravity well really holds them when you pop the aux battery. It really keeps them there, so that's cool.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to cover?
No, that's about it. Let's do the interview.
Let's do it. On the line, we have Daniel Stahl, the executive producer of Star Trek Online, the new executive producer. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, welcome, guys. I'm glad to be here. We go way back.
We do. It's been a long time.
We were just actually looking. We did an interview with you almost exactly 6 months ago.
Yep.
how far you've come.
We've chatted a bit offline since then, but nothing on the show or anything. Well,
right.
So we've got a couple of questions now. While we should say we're talking to Daniel on a Friday afternoon, and he is working like a madman trying to get season 2 ready for Tribble.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to kind of keep it short. So we'll start off with the first question.
Well, my first question, Daniel, is everybody by now has seen the goodbye thread from Zinc. And I guess my big question is to you. I thought that the forums had rules against I quit threads. What's the deal? Playing favorites?
It's funny. I'm surprised that he didn't go on there and do that. He's got several forum accounts, so I wouldn't be surprised if he went on there and snuck that in. Either that or the moderators just deleted it right away. But
so do you have to have that awkward conversation of, all right, but now you have to pay, Craig. No. You have to subscribe now, Craig.
He's so smart. I'm sure that he probably has backdoors into everything, and he'll probably keep making content. He'll find a way. We'll see.
All right. Well,
I'll probably take that as a challenge.
Well, maybe we'll see him in game then.
I have to say though, we have talked to you before, and both of us have a pretty good impression of you. I mean, not just to sound like a overbearing fanboy here, but
or blow beer up your butt, as the Jupiter Broadcasting term goes.
Right. But I'm actually really excited to see you in charge of this project, and I want to give you my honest congratulations on taking over the project.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you so much. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Craig did a great job helping to shape what STO is. But, a lot of us have been here since the very beginning as well. And so we kind of think of the project as sort of a team effort. And I really am excited about the opportunity to really work closely with the leads on this team and focus on the things that I believe the players want. And that's where I think you're going to see a little bit of a difference in the upcoming updates than you have, because I like to get in there and talk to you guys a little bit more than maybe Craig did.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, because of the fact that you do get in there and talk to the players a little more, as a new father myself, I know it's extremely challenging time, so I think I know the commitment you have awesome to make. So,
and you thought you weren't getting any sleep up until now.
You're definitely up for a challenge. So why don't
now it's just more of a mechanical thing. It's like, how do I type and play and have a baby in one arm?
Right.
It's
you have to get a sling. It's the sling you need to get yourself a sling, and then the baby will sleep in that while you work. At least that was my trick.
Daniel,
at one point I had my elbow on her head, and I'm like, this isn't good. She doesn't like
it. Helps with the carpal tunnel, though.
Daniel, I was wondering if you had anything to say to the guys out there that are saying, oh, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. This means that this is the end of STO. We were seeing people leave. I mean, first there was Gozer, and then we have had a lot of changes in the community reps for Star Trek Online as well. And with Zinc kind of capping off this recent personnel changes, a lot of people are crying foul, doom and gloom over all this.
Yeah, so one thing I'd like to point out is the fact that Star Trek Online has had very little turnover compared to other projects that I've worked on. Yes, we've lost Gozer and we've lost Zinc. We've lost a couple character artists, but it's more like those guys have gone on. Their projects on Star Trek have actually catapulted them, and they're actually going on to bigger and better things. So I don't feel like there's people leaving the project because they don't want to work on Star Trek. I think they're leaving the project because they've become excited about what they were doing and want to change a pace. And so when I look at the future and the people thinking that Craig leaving is doom and gloom, I just don't buy it, because when I've talked to Craig, it really just isn't that at all. I think he misses Star Trek. I think he's at home right now wishing he was here. I think he's just tired.
Yeah, I mean, he's been working. You see, people look at it from the time the game was launched, right? They look at it from 6 months ago, but the reality is that he's already been working on it for 2.5 years in-house. So he's already been living it for 2.5 years, where to the general public, it's only 6 months
old.
Another
4 or 5 years before that with Cryptic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't we...
yeah, and absolutely. And
go ahead.
work a lot of hours. I mean, we're here till 7 or 8 at night, and he's usually the last one here. So I think he's just looking for a little bit more life balance right now.
Yeah. Good for him. Why don't we talk a little bit about the game?
Okay.
I think that's what a lot of people want to hear about. And the first thing I want to know about is, I got to ask, when am I going to see a V'ger Special Task Force?
Or Fleet Action.
Or a Fleet Action.
You know what?
A Fleet Action would be awesome.
ever since we started putting the content in the game and deciding where we were going to go, I kept pitching V'ger, and I'm like, let's do V'ger. It'd be awesome. Let's get the character artists. Let's build these massive maps. We've got the effects. We can do it. And and Craig would always say, no, we can't do that. That's crazy talk. And
meanwhile, he's pushing the idea of playable Vorta.
I think he was just doing it. He was just doing it to Josh with me. But it's funny, now that I'm EP, I'm like, we can't do feature. That's crazy. But it's still a great.
That's too funny. Yeah, looking at the big picture maybe sometimes changes the perspective a little bit.
Daniel, are you still going to be in charge of doing the engineering reports we've come to know and love?
Yeah, in fact, when I started doing the engineering reports, it was really sort of Craig and I talked about, you want to do them? No, I want to do them. So I've always wanted to do the engineering reports, and I hope to continue doing that. And really, the engineering reports, a lot of people, might not necessarily have known my role on the team, but I do work mostly on the schedules and what people are working on and what we're doing next. So a lot of that really has been top-level insight into what we're doing, and I hope to continue that on.
What kind of gameplay content are we going to see with weekly stories from a story standpoint? It just seems like I think a lot of people are worried that's a lot of rapid fire content, but not a lot of deep gameplay. So maybe is there any kind of plot details you could sort of reassure us with?
Mm-hmm.
Well, sure. There's a lot of things in season 2 and weekly sort of series. Our attempt to replicate what the TV shows represented for a lot of us. So I remember when the series was on and you'd have new episodes, there was always sort of this looking forward to what would be next. I think of them as they may not necessarily be task force level missions, but you know what it is? We hope to at least take a small little story chunk, maybe 5 or 6 episodes at a time, and say, let's explore this, or let's look at this thing from the Star Trek universe and let's build a little story around that. So I kind of look at mission arcs like Past Imperfect, where going and seeing the gateway and traveling back in time. That would have been something close in line to what I would consider a series. If we had done that on a weekly episode level, I think that's kind of what we're shooting for.
Well, that would be fantastic.
So I'm just not sure if it's going to work. I mean, the idea is that, is it just not interesting to have this thing every week? Maybe it's awesome. Maybe people really enjoy kind of signing in. Maybe it comes out on a Tuesday and they log in every Tuesday and there's something new to do. That's really the hope. And if it takes off, we're just going to keep making them.
That does sound like a lot of fun.
Can you give us a little bit of any sort of available spoilers on what the first episode or two might be like? Also, the Klingon PvE content, maybe? We know that they will exist, but we don't really know the plot lines behind them. Can you give us a little bit of a hint there?
We're introducing a new race called the Deferi, and the Deferi are basically in a part of space that's going to be above Cardassian sector. But the idea being is this is a neutral mission-giving faction that works for both the Klingons and the Feds. Right now, if you're a Klingon or Fed character, you don't get your missions from the same people. So the Deferi are kind of interesting because they're allowing us to act as this neutral party that both factions want to do missions for. And that works for both factions, or any new factions we decide to add later down the road.
I like that. That reminds me very much of Captain Kirk going to a planet where there was already Klingons there who are also trying to negotiate some sort of deal with the same race. And the race doesn't care if it's the Federation or the Klingons. They just want the deal for the planet. That's pretty neat.
Exactly.
Now, as we explore more of these epic old storylines and flesh them out a little more, are we going to see any more of the Iconians?
The Iconians, I've seen a lot of concept art for Iconians, so I think the Iconians are definitely somewhere in the future. I haven't seen any in-game assets of the Iconians, but I've certainly seen a lot of beautiful pictures and really interesting artwork about what the Iconians could be.
Can I ask you a question about that? What would be the internal process? So when somebody comes to you and says, hey, boss, I now have pretty much all of the base assets we need to put this race into STO. Now, do you at that point say, okay, great, but how do we work that in from a story standpoint? Is there a filter that goes through, or what drives that kind of, we can do this now? How do we do it?
It's typically driven by, it's a two-part process, because take, for example, I'm thinking of like the Undine as an example. So the Undine were a really cool species we wanted to do. It was technically challenging because they're triped, So they don't walk the same way as the rest of our character models. And so the character art team wanted to do them, and then the powers guys wanted to do them because they had some weird telepathy powers. And then content we all sort of get together and we have this giant list of all the species that we could possibly do, and we sort of decide on the ones that kind of work for everybody. So we don't just add a species simply because one different department wants to see it. We kind of do it together and say, oh yeah, well then if we do those guys, then we can do this storyline, or we can do this part of space. So it's kind of a group effort when we decide on new species that are going to be either bad guys or NPCs in the game.
Cool. Now, on that topic of adding new races to the game, do you guys have an internal timeline that you might be able to announce on when the first next playable faction may be available?
We've done some polls. It's always in the back of our minds. I think we wanted to do. Craig was, early on we kept talking about when's the next playable faction, and I think from just a business perspective, next playable faction is usually that first milestone after an MMO when you're sort of adding a lot of new content to the game. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we realized is that it really, adding a new faction right now is kind of doing a disservice to the Klingon faction. So we've shifted gears away from doing a new faction right now, and we're really trying to focus on the two factions we have and making them more equal in that respect before we jump.
I know a lot of players would be happy to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah,
to
so
hear
as far as the new, as far as whether we're going to add Romulan or Cardassian, we definitely want to do it, but we don't want to do it too soon. Mm-hmm. That might upset some Romulan fans, but I think it just as a service to the Klingons and what we have, we just don't want to do it until we feel comfortable with.
Well, why don't we talk before we let you go? Why don't we talk a little bit about let's expand on the Klingons a little bit and what's going on there.
Yeah, so one of the things that we really wanted to do in bringing equality to the factions is we wanted to focus on adding some PvE content for Klingons. This is something that players on the forums were asking for. Klingons at launch were really talked about as being a PvP faction. I think for the majority of gamers that's still true, but there's a lot of people that want episodes, and so this update, Season 2 update, has far more Klingon content than we've ever done in the past. Whether it be the new, there's 8 new episodes that are just Klingon that no other faction can play. But then they also gain access to the new Undine Borg conflict episodes that are going to take place. And they also have access to the new Deferi weekly episodes as well. So from our standpoint, in addition to doing Klingon customization and focusing on sort of neutral faction episodes, we're actually looking at this as this is a big Klingon update for us, and we're really excited to see how players take to that.
I guarantee you they're going to take well because we get a ton of email about Klingons. So I know they're going to like that. Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to actually dusting off my Klingon character. I've done that for a little bit. There's going to be some
fun. We've been doing some internal play tests of the Klingon episodes, and they have a really unique nemesis in the Fekiri. And the Fekiri, there's been some episodes that talk about them and their lore, and they're sort of an old nemesis. These guys are really been fun for us because they're not your typical Star Trek walking around with phasers kind of bad guy group. They're a little bit more mystical. They're a little bit more ancient enemy-like, and we're hoping to introduce some types of gameplay that we just hadn't seen in Star Trek before.
That could be a lot of fun.
That could be.
I'm looking forward to that. All right, and that's going to be on Tribble hopefully by the time people are seeing this episode, right?
That's the goal, yes.
Rock and roll. Well, Daniel, we know that you're under the gun there on this Friday afternoon, so we'll let you go. But thanks for joining us, and congratulations on the new gig.
Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. All right, keep up the great work. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care, guys.
Time for the listener mailbag, and we've got a doozy. We asked you, how would you improve your buffs if they actually mattered in Star Trek Online?
Yeah.
Right now they're just kind of, I think, what did you call it? Equipment? Shiny?
Yeah. Shinies. Some of you guys are crazy.
You guys had a lot of ideas, yeah.
No, okay. It wasn't just a lot of ideas, but we got like 3 or 4 emails that were several pages in length with, you know what I'm going to do? Actually, some of those I can't include in the show because we just don't have enough freaking time for you guys' massive ideas. I'm going to copy and paste those over to our forum.
Okay.
Over in a separate post that you can find at jupitercolony.com, you will find some other ideas, epic ideas from some of our listeners.
It's a great idea.
Yeah. So if you don't hear yours read and you send us a 12-page treaty on this stuff, you can go there and see it in lovely black and white.
Now, what we've often noticed is sometimes there'll be some common trend responses, so we'll take a lot of those emails and sort of boil them down to those main common trends. So we'll kick those ones off first, we'll list those, and then we'll get into individual ideas that sort of sparked our interest. We got a lot of requests for position assignments, like a chief engineer, the first officer, the security chief.
I would say probably at least half of the emails that we received had this mentioned at some point within them.
And I like that because those are always, especially the chief engineer and the chief medical officer, are always iconic roles. And then Worf kind of defined the security officer role.
And if you think about it, chief science officer in the form of Spock.
Oh, absolutely.
Like that. Yeah.
And Data was the, So, all right, I like that. Now, Richter scale sort of summed up what a lot of people said well here a couple of times. Richter scale recommends that each position would have a requirement based on what your commissioned officer lineup is. So if they're the chief medical officer or whatever, so you'd have a total of 3 commissioned officer, a science officer, engineer, things like that.
Richter scale saying was basically you can't have a chief without the Indians.
Right. So you get all these people so that you have a hierarchy, and you could always supposedly I guess maybe take a new buff on and replace one of them too.
Yeah, probably. His basic idea was that in order to have a chief available on your ship, and there's a reason for that we'll get to in just a sec, you would have to have them basically, they need a supporting staff.
Yeah.
So if you only have one science officer on your ship, they can't be your chief medical because they don't have a supporting staff.
So they have to be doing all the medical work. They got to be doing the cutting.
Right.
Yeah. He had to kind of follow that up with each one of them would have an ability you'd have to unlock. For example, the chief science officer would be capable of enhancing sensors once per hour.
Yeah.
Sort of maybe like a triple buff.
So you would get into a map, let's say one of those boring exploration maps where it's just scan 5 anomalies. Well, you fire off your chief science officer ability and it makes each anomaly either like split into a second anomaly, so there's twice as many harvestables, or
every one you get gives you one buff or something like that.
Something like that. The other idea he had was that they also have a small percentage of spawning enemies that were just on the edge of sensor range. That'd be a nice little surprise to come up on you, and you use it once per hour when you get to these maps, and it's just a fun little extra toy to play with.
That would be. That's a good way to call it.
It's not so much adding depth to your bridge officers.
Of just helping with the boredom.
Yeah.
What do you think about this idea of boffs being either kidnappable, or your bridge officer maybe can be dead? What do you think of this of permanent removal of your bridge officer possibility? Maybe through storyline or something like that.
This is a little deeper than just boff gameplay mechanics. This goes into the whole idea of enhancing your character in an MMO. I understand the psychology behind.
Yeah, it's a head game thing.
Absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
If you have a chance of losing something, you're going to try harder to hold on to it, and to make it something special when you have it.
Yeah.
But if you spend that time on it,
I think that's the idea.
you don't want to randomly lose it. You would get really ticked off at the people that made it possible for you to lose it.
I agree. Now, but at the same time, you do want stakes that you can fail. And you and I are always saying, let us fail.
Yeah, I combine both of these points into a single, but I don't agree with the permanent removal of buffs. The temporary removal due to kidnapping or injury or temporary
and you just don't get that buff back till you complete the mission.
Right.
Yeah.
Now think about there are 4 lights, that episode. Beverly and Worf both went with Picard on his mission. You would not only lose the chief medical officer and your security officer, and you would have to make do and do your own side of the mission while being handicapped a little bit. It would make you appreciate the fact that you had those other bridge officers.
Absolutely.
And that you would either have to rescue them or they would come back to you eventually.
Having to rescue, I love the idea of I've been doing a lot of beam down and kill the Jemadar, beam down, kill the Jemadar. Well, how cool would it be one of those times I beam down and they kidnap one of my boss?
Yeah.
Because they always are run off anyways, those crazy bots. I never know what they're up to. But that was a common thing that people wrote in. And then another thing was separate missions for your boss.
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit deeper into this later on because there were some great ideas along this line. But just to touch on it briefly, a lot of you said you want missions that are either driven by the bridge officers themselves and that their personality or something like that, or that you can actually play as your bridge officers.
That was an interesting one. I hadn't even thought of that.
That idea inspired me to come up with a whole other idea. So you guys sending us things
primed your brain juice,
made my brain juices flow. So here's another idea for you guys: is when you reach high enough so that you can promote a character to captain, that you might have the ability to transmogrify that bridge officer into an alt character. You hit admiral. And then you choose one of your bridge officers that will sadly leave your admiral's ship.
Like Riker did. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then you would have, when you get to your character selection screen, there's your other buff as a new character at captain level.
I would like that.
Yeah.
Because also, I don't really want to play all the early level stuff anymore.
No, I don't think anybody does really, especially the levels 1 through 10. It's kind of a grind.
Yeah.
You don't have enough abilities on your ship. It's just not interesting enough. So if you could skip all the earlier stuff, if you wanted to, it would be an optional thing.
All right, you want to talk about some of the more direct ideas that we had?
Individual. These are some of just that stood out to us.
This first one here by, was it Smuzzle? Is that what it is?
Sure.
Is that, yeah, SMUZZLE. I don't know. Okay, give each buff a specialization with the profession, the result, and a passive buff during ground combat when combined with other specializations.
Well, let me just read you the example here. His example includes, like, you could have a science officer specialized in biology, an engineer specialized in weapon manufacture, and a tactical specialized in as being a helmsman. And when you get those 3 people on your away team sent down together, those 3 flags, if you want to call them that,
combined to make one.
Combined to make a specific buff that is applied to you. And he didn't list those, so I just included it as an example, like a 5% increase in the quality of weapons that drop.
Oh, so more like a Power Rangers buff.
Yeah. Now you're on board.
Dr. Drake wrote in, and he said he wants to be able to chat with his bridge officers. Could just be one-liners chosen from a list that would include responses back. Like you go up to them, you press F, and you have some dialogue choices.
And the responses would be based on, like, your rank, your profession,
and their race.
Yeah, and a combination. Yeah.
Yeah. I personally, this idea doesn't really interest me that much because I don't really foresee like the dialogue being probably all that engaging.
No, one of the main reasons that this idea did stick out to me, though, and that I actually went to bat for you, Dr. Drake, and put this in our show notes, is because I think it's simple enough that we could see this as early as it takes to write that many responses.
Yeah.
I think it's probably already there, and it would add a slight level of depth that when you go to your bridge, you can actually talk to Ensign Hoopamachoop, and he would say,
"That's true.
When was the last time you went through Ponfar, Captain T'Pol?"
It is. Yeah, I do know. I guess so. It is kind of weird when you go to your bridge and they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I am your captain. Hey.
And, let me add just a slight other layer of depth to this. What if they could also interact with people you invite to your bridge?
When you say that, it makes me think of 7-layer dip. And that sounds good. And I would love if my boss wouldn't be antisocial if people visited my
And I would love if they tasted like 7-layer dip.
Yeah, especially with lots of guacamole.
Yeah.
So Brock Lee wrote in, and he said, allow passive feats to be advanced. What does that mean?
There's a reason right now in game why you would want to replace a white quality bridge officer with a purple quality, and that is primarily for these passive traits. But if you didn't have to, if you could become attached, like you've got bridge officers that you tried to write backstories for, and they're white quality. You got them when you were in the tutorial.
Yep. And I've held on to them just because theoretically they should have some sort of story meaning.
Right.
But it's not the most.
Plus, I spent a lot of time making those costumes for you. You better not get rid of them.
So how does this change? What is he saying here?
This would allow you to eventually, rather than replacing those bridge officers with the purple bridge
just allow them to achieve that over time?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it might even require you to use those purple officers to train the white ones, and then just like they do with abilities, or you can potentially do with abilities right now in the game.
Okay.
Some way so that you would have the option of becoming more attached to those bridge officers you earned early on, rather than always having to replace them in order to stay on the cutting edge.
What do you think about Mickey Ward's idea? He wrote and he said, loyalty mechanics. Driven by utilization and interaction with the captain, both on missions and via social mini-game stuff on your ship, things like that.
Like chess and poker and that kind of stuff. Like, right now, we know we're going to have poker on the ships eventually, but if you could go to your poker lounge and play it with your bridge officers, and that also, besides just being fun, could also add to their loyalty.
Yeah.
Like the last mission of Next Generation.
Right, all good things where they wrap up the whole episode.
Picard walks into the poker game finally. Yep. If he would have been doing that earlier on, maybe it would have only taken 4 years for them to be willing to fly into an anomaly and destroy the ship.
Maybe.
Instead of 7.
He won't ever know because he blew it.
Right.
He should have played poker early on. All right, well, Scary Guy wrote in, awesome name, and Scary Guy says, it all comes down to the writing, guys. The current system could work if missions were just a little better written. Everyone would have the same crew, but at least we would care about them more. You don't need to change everything. Just make what we've got better.
What is in the game could work if, like, the bridge officer pop-ups were a little more in-depth, a little more character-driven.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that needs to be changed.
The point that I have
I don't think it's enough alone.
The point in parentheses that I put in our show notes there is actually something that I added. Is that if
so.
they put that depth into the existing missions, everyone would end up with the same crew. But let me paint that a different way. Everybody that plays Mass Effect or Dragon Age or Neverwinter Nights or Baldur's Gate all has the same crew. But everybody is very attached to that crew. You know, so it's not entirely a bad thing. It could be a little awkward in an MMO.
Well, I think it's a necessary part, but only a part of what it takes to make the boss important.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do it by yourself, but it needs to be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
I generally speaking, I'm on board with enhancing the writing that's already in the game.
Well, I like this. Well, and we have a link in our show notes to this forum thread where this is an amazing thread. It's one of these threads that we love to give to point people to. This guy has broken down storyline arcs that are possibilities.
It's a very in-depth system. This is comes to us thanks to Leviathan 99, and it includes basically a list of traits that every bridge officer either starts with or that you choose when you obtain them. And each of these traits, in combination with a different tier of traits, would lead to a number of subset of personal bridge officer missions. And the system goes on from that into even further depth, but it all ties back to that.
And it sounds extremely engaging.
And I gotta say, we love pictures.
Always a win.
It always brings it home. Maybe I'm just too much of a visual thinker.
It's and it's a very, very long, wordy post, and I have a tendency to skip that stuff. But when I see the pictures, I'm like, oh, he must have talked to he must go into more detail what this picture represents in the post. And I go back up and I read the whole thing. I finish it.
I would also like to add that Leviathan has been taking feedback from this thread from other community members. So this isn't solely his effort.
Yeah.
If you have anything that you would like to add to it, I'm sure he will listen to your ideas.
Anything this epic requires multiple community input on. So that's a neat one. So
those
check
are
out
the best ideas I love, is the community-driven.
Absolutely.
On every level.
Okay, now we've got another question for you. And this one has been in the works a little bit. We've kind of mentioned it in bits and pieces throughout a few of the most recent episodes. But we want to ask you, if you could go to the drawing board with sector space, would you change sector space and how, or would you maybe even get rid of it? And what would you put in its place?
I got to admit, I'd get rid of it. But I know not everybody is on board with that, including this guy.
Well, no, not necessarily. I would say leave sector space like it is now, only some of the improvements we've seen some hints on are making it more vast and a little more high-tech looking. Or maybe...
They've also kind of toned down that big neon space lane thing a little bit.
And so take that, leave that. Okay. Also, take out traffic cop. Just auto zone me after I hit the wall with a countdown or something.
Sure.
And then let me leave sector space and go into my bridge, and then from my bridge walk around my ship. But even if I can only be in my bridge with sector space like up on the view screen, and then later on build out interiors once those are ready down the road, that'd be cool. But it'd be cool to have the option to just go from my bridge to sector space and back. And as long as I can auto zone while I'm traveling, I'll spend 5 minutes in my bridge walking around and go hit on those dialogues that are going to be added to BOFs.
If you were at Earth Space Dock and you could
now I want those BOF dialogues. Now that I can walk around my bridge, I want those BOFs. I don't want to talk to them. I'm going to be lonely.
You put food on them earlier.
Right now, what I call sector space is my team speak time.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
You know, early on, I mentioned that sector space to me felt like an analog to games like World of Warcraft, where you go and hop on a griffin and fly to your next adventuring point.
Yeah.
The problem is that it's between every single mission that you do.
Yeah.
So unlike a game like World of Warcraft, where you can head off to the Knoll camp and do 4 or 5 different missions, then go back to town and turn them all in STO, you're always doing one mission, then traveling, then one mission, then traveling. So it gets a little repetitive.
So what would be nice to avoid maybe that repetitive feeling is when you're on the ground, before you beam up, ask me, do I want to beam to my bridge or to sector space?
Yeah.
Or the wording, so that way I know if I'm inside, do you want to beam to interior view or exterior view?
Yeah.
And then exterior view, you're in sector space, interior. That way I don't have to get into sector space and then rezone back to my bridge just not to be in sector space again.
Right.
That'd be neat. Anyways, we'd love to hear your thoughts. There's a couple different ways you can get those to us. Head over to our forum at jupitercolony.com. There's a section in there just for Stoked, or you can email us at stoked@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Also, be sure to keep an eye on our Facebook page, facebook.com/JupiterBroadcasting. In probably about 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks, we'll be doing another live gameplay
I have an itch. I think it's going to be sooner than that.
Really?
I'd almost be okay with doing it next episode, but I don't know if we have
Well, keep an eye on it, and we will announce it then, and you can join us live for
Join us, and we go out and play, and we stream that out, and then we incorporate that into the next episode of Stoked.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We come out every Tuesday over at JupiterBroadcasting.com, and we hope you will join us then. And until then, have a great Stoked week.